Hello all, welcome back. I am thrilled to see you. If you have no idea who I am, my name is Madeleine Klein, and I talk about all things Canadian true crime, missing persons, mystery, and history. Today's subject is going to be David Alexander Snow. Have you heard of this piece of garbage? Well, if you haven't, prepare to be disgusted. He was once an antiques dealer in Orangeville, Ontario, where he spent the majority of his life, and he was just generally weird and creepy and gross. He constantly had foul body odor. He was always disheveled. His teeth were rotting out of his mouth. He was awkward. He was just a generally weird guy. In early 1992, Snow's antique shop suddenly closed and he was gone without a trace. Shortly after he vanished, there were many reports of cottage break-ins in the small town of Caledon, Ontario. Lots of people in Ontario have little seasonal cabins, and when they went to go open their cabin for the season, they would find that someone had been squatting there. Numerous people reported break-ins and finding bizarre things inside of their summer homes. There would be bottles of urine and human excrement wrapped in newspaper. Pornography was left behind, as well as weird military writings, and sometimes items like clothes or jewelry would be missing. The break-ins would be reported, police would come and investigate and take fingerprints from all of these scenes, and lo and behold, they all matched up, giving Snow his first nickname, the House Hermit. In one incident in March of 1992, Snow was squatting on a property and the owners showed up unexpectedly to check on the place. When the couple opened the door, they were met with David Snow pointing a gun at them. He ordered the couple back into their car and forced them to drive him into Toronto, which is like an hour drive, give or take. Snow ordered them to take him to their main house in the city. When they got into the city, they were stopped at a fairly busy intersection, and the man driving, although he had a gun pointed at him, refused to take David any further. Snow panicked, got out of the car, and disappeared into a mass of people. Police investigated, took fingerprints from the car and the cottage, and positively matched them to the other break-ins that had occurred. April 7th, 1992, things took a dark turn. 55-year-old Ian Blackburn went to check on his Caledon cabin. Upon entering his own property, he was attacked, beaten, and tied up. Ian was forced to call his wife Nancy and summon her to their summer home. Immediately upon arriving to the property, Nancy too was attacked. She was stripped, beaten, and choked to death, presumably in front of her tied-up husband. After killing Nancy Blackburn, Snow moved her body into the trunk of the Blackburns' car and ordered Ian to drive him to their Toronto home, where he was also killed and put in the trunk of the car. 4 days would pass before the bodies of the Blackburns would be discovered. Relatives of the family had grown concerned as they hadn't heard from the couple in days, and neither had shown up to work. One of their nephews arrived at the Blackburn residence to find their car in the driveway and 4 days of newspapers on the porch. However, when he rang the bell, there was no answer. He investigated the car, spotting a blood-stained tissue in the back seat. Wondering and hoping the Blackburns had suitcases packed, he opened the trunk of the car only to discover the bodies of Ian and Nancy. Autopsy reports showed that both victims suffered major and multiple blunt force injuries, and both victims had ligature marks on their wrists, ankles, neck, and thighs. There were no leads until they found a bag that had been thrown into a ditch near the crime scene full of bottles of urine, human feces, and odd military writings. Eerily similar evidence that had been found in the cabins of the house hermit. Authorities decided to release the military writings to the media in hopes someone would recognize the odd writing style. Lo and behold, they got a call from a woman who was sure she knew whose writing that was. The woman was sure they belonged to an old antiques dealer named David Snow, who was as weird and gross as they came. I'm unsure how they managed to do this, but they were able to get Snow's fingerprints and match them up with the house hermit's. This led to police searching Snow's home and finding a collection of disturbing items, a collection of pornography cut out of magazines and categorized into women's parts, as well as numerous books on military equipment. When investigators reached the attic, it was clear that Snow spent most of his time up there living like an animal. In their search, they came across a photo of the Blackburns' summer home. This led investigators to believe that the Blackburns were known to Snow prior to the double homicide. Fast forward a couple months. On June 29th, 1992, on the other side of the country near Vancouver, British Columbia, a 26-year-old woman was working alone in a clothing store. There was a weird man entering and exiting the store claiming to be looking for a gift. She said that she was always aware of when this man was in the store because he reeked. Like, the foul odor that was coming off of this man was indescribable. The woman closed the store only to have Smelly knock on the door and tell her that he had finally made up his mind on what he wanted to purchase. I would have been like, no, I'm closed. My till's closed. Get the fuck out of here. She was a lot nicer than me because she let him back in, and immediately upon entering, he pulled out a gun. He forced her into the back room, made her strip, and began sexually assaulting her. At one point, Snow had heard something coming from the front of the store and went to check it out. And this woman took that opportunity to get the hell out of there. She ran out the back door completely naked and handcuffed into the busy street, screaming for help. Police arrived and took a report and a detailed description of the perpetrator, but unfortunately it wasn't connected to David Snow at the time. The first time I read that, I was like, what? But then I realized this incident happened in Vancouver, whereas Snow was from Ontario. Cops barely communicate province to province now, let alone in '92. There's no way they would have made that connection, unfortunately. Only 5 days after the first attack, Snow would strike again. A young woman was working at a photo studio on Hastings Street, and Snow entered just before closing time. He pulled a gun on the woman, took her out of the store, and led her down a busy street in broad daylight, with literally thousands of witnesses that didn't even know what they were witnessing. Snow led the woman 8 kilometers into a wooded area where he had a camp set up. Snow tied and gagged the woman and brutally raped her in every way possible, up to 4 times a day for 9 days. All of this took place just 75 yards away from one of Vancouver's busiest roads. 8 days after successfully abducting that first victim, Snow went shopping again. On July 11th, Snow entered a video store and pulled a gun on the 2 employees. On July 11th, Snow entered a video store in North Van and pulled a gun on the 2 employees inside. Snow tied the manager up and kidnapped the 19-year-old employee. He forced her into her own car and made her drive them out to the campsite. Upon arriving, he decided to take both women to a different location. After authorities learnt of the abduction, they went out and searched for the 19-year-old's car and found it abandoned on a back road. The officers searched the car and surrounding area but found nothing until they heard the scream of a woman coming from the woods. They booked it into the forest and found the 19-year-old abductee tied to a tree. While untying the woman, they heard another scream, and they would find the woman that was abducted over a week ago also tied to a tree. The 26-year-old victim that had been abducted for 9 days was unresponsive and showed no expression when asked a question. The women were both taken to hospital, and it was established who they were looking for. From the description they could get from the women and the evidence they found at the campsite, it was obvious this was the same man from Caledon, Ontario. They were looking for David Snow. Snow knew the jig was up and attempted to run, heading west into the woods. He would reappear at about 3:30 a.m. on July 12th, 15 kilometers away from where he was last seen. A woman was closing down a restaurant and Snow took her hostage at gunpoint. But when he forced her into the back of the restaurant, it triggered a silent alarm and a security company called. David forced her to tell the company that everything was fine, but thankfully the person on the other end didn't buy it and notified police. Snow started brutally beating and sexually assaulting her, put a bag over her head, and began strangling her with wire. Police arrived just in time. This woman was nearly dead when they finally managed to apprehend David Snow. I don't know why it took 5 goddamn years, but on July 18th, 1997, David Snow was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. In addition to being charged for the first-degree murders of Ian and Nancy Blackburn, he was also facing charges of kidnapping, forcible confinement, robbery, weapons charges, and sexual assault causing bodily harm. Those have to be the 4 worst words put together ever. As if sexual assault isn't bad enough, sexual assault causing bodily harm makes my stomach churn. What did he do to those women? David Snow would thankfully be labeled as a dangerous offender. David is around 68 years old now and remains in a British Columbia prison to this day. He applied for parole in 2019 and it was thankfully denied. I thought he had no chance of parole, but it is Canada. He has been diagnosed with paraphilia, which by definition is... Hang on. I'm not about to memorize this. Paraphilia, by definition, is persistent and reoccurrent sexual interests, urges, fantasies, or behaviors of marked intensity involving objects, activities, or even... Oh, I'm blind. Or even situations that are atypical in nature. He was diagnosed as a sexual sadist as well and has antisocial personality disorder. His understanding of the severity of his crimes is none. Like, he doesn't get it. He claims to have completed anger management and sexual offender programs while in prison, but his comprehension of what he's done is just not there. And I don't think it ever will be. He is a dangerous offender and always will be. These types of monsters are beyond rehabilitation. So that's the disturbing and horrific story of David Snow. This is why I support the death penalty for these kinds of people. Why should he be living rent-free in a taxpayer-funded facility for the remainder of his life? Take him out back and be done with it. Anyway, that's just my vengeful opinion. Let me know what you think about this despicable piece of trash. I can't believe I had never heard about this monster before. I was reading up on Clifford Olson and found out about David in that journey. I'm going to talk about Clifford Olson next week, so be on the lookout for that. Also keep an eye out for a new little series that I started called Cases That Keep Me Up. I talk about the worst of the worst cases I have ever come across from all across the world. I'll have my latest linked down below. I talk about the torture and murder of 16-year-old Sylvia Likens from Indiana. Check that out if it strikes your morbid curiosity. I'll also have my Linktree linked if you want to check out any of my other content. Like, subscribe, comment, whatever you want to do. Just don't kill or kidnap anyone. Thanks for joining me today, you guys. I always appreciate you hanging out, and I will catch you guys later. See you soon.